Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today we're wrapping up all the books I read in March, which turned out to be a pretty good reading month for me, both in terms of the quality of the books I was reading, and in terms of branching out and trying a few things that were outside of my usual comfort zone. The other thing we're going to be doing in this video today, though, is introducing my Chewy Crunchy graphic, which I talked about way back in late December, I think, when I was putting together my 2025 goals. My friend and I have been talking about books this way for many years now. We've been friends since high school, and we've for a very long time talked about books as being kind of on a chewy crunchy scale, or actually we'll do chewy over here and crunchy over here. So a chewy book is something that's like eating a steak. It's really flavorful, it's a lot of nutritional value, but you have to work for it. You really have to dig your teeth into it. You have to chew it. A crunchy book, on the other hand, maybe we'll have some things for you to think about, but it's gonna be more addictive. It's more like eating potato chips or popcorn, and for the most part, it's probably gonna lack a lot of nutritional value. It's enjoyable to consume, it's fun, you're having a good time, it's easy to keep picking it up and reading it, but you're not necessarily gonna get as much out of it. Books can fall anywhere in this spectrum. It's not like either or. You can have a book that has a really addictive writing style but gives you a lot of interesting themes to think about. So things can fall kind of anywhere along that line. And I originally intended to start using this particular scale way back in January, but then when I went to put together the graphic, my friend and I realized that something was missing. So over the last little while, we've been kind of developing it, and we decided that smooth was the element that was missing. So now we're gonna have a triangle. So we have chewy, we have crunchy, and then we have up here, we have smooth. And smooth books are things that are like eating ice cream or jello or eating a really delicious blended soup. It's something where you're not going to have as much resistance as something that's crunchy. There's probably going to be maybe lower stakes. Maybe the writing style is really like smooth and elegant. But for whatever reason, it's going to be like a very smooth, easy reading experience. And again, things can fall anywhere in that spectrum. You can have something that, for the most part, has like a really smooth writing style, but also has some like really intense high action moments, and also gives you some themes to think about. Something can sit like directly in the middle of the scale. So what I'm going to be doing for this video, and what I would love to know in the comments below if you enjoy this, is for each of these books, I'm going to let you know, I'm going to put a graphic on screen and show you where I think those books fall in that scale. I personally find it really useful to think about books in this way because it gives me a sense of like what I'm in the mood for. Sometimes you want something that's really addictive and crunchy. Sometimes you want something where you're going to have to think, and sometimes you want something that's just going to be a smooth experience. Or maybe you want something that's somewhere in the middle. So I find it personally really useful, but I would love to know down in the comments below how you're feeling about it once we get through this wrap up with these first set of books that I'm going to be applying the scale to. So we're going to go ahead and dive in because I have 8 books to talk about and I'm pretty excited to talk about them. The first thing I finished in March was The Sunshine Court by Nora Sakavic. This is the 4th book overall in the All for the Game series, but it's the start of the 2nd trilogy. And in this one, we're following Jean Moreau, who is a minor side character in the original trilogy, which, if you're unfamiliar with this entirely, it's a series where the Yakuza are operating out of West Virginia, and there's a sport called Xe, and the characters are like associated with the Yakuza, or like hunted by the Yakuza, or belong to the Yakuza, and then also they play Xe, which is a sport, and also there's like romance elements. It's hard to describe because it's a series that doesn't do any one genre. It combines multiple and defies genre-specific expectations. So it's a very weird series, and this one is following Jean, who is left in a pretty traumatic spot at the end of the previous series, and we're following him here as he is kind of coming out of that and moving on to his own kind of journey of healing and learning to love himself after everything that's happened to him. The first half of this, I think, is fairly strong. It's recounting the events of the end of the previous series. Mostly it's like the last half of The King's Men, but recounting them from Jean's point of view, which I think is really important for establishing the foundation of his personality and his kind of mental state at the end of the series, but also for him to see that his antagonists are stoppable, they're not gods among men. I think that's necessary for him before he can move on and go to the new team that he's going to be joining and start to unravel all of the feelings that he has about everything. That said, it kind of drops off after that point. I think once he meets the new team, it becomes frustrating because the original series focuses a lot on like consent and agency and people choosing when and what they want to disclose, and Jean doesn't get that. The new team is supposed to be this like team of golden retrievers who are supportive and friendly and kind, and they just bulldoze Jean at every turn. He doesn't ever get to choose what to disclose. He gets pushed into situations where they find out things about him that he wasn't ready to talk about, or they badger him for information until he relents. And I just feel like this is a major step back for the series. I think the first half is strong, but the second half just does a really terrible job of convincing me that the new team is going to be good for Jean and going to facilitate his healing from this kind of traumatic background that he has. So overall, I think this is very bad. I gave it 2 stars. It's enjoyable in that it's like addictive and there's so much bullshit that you kind of keep picking it up to see what's going to happen next, but I just don't think it's very good. It's also a book that I would describe as entirely crunchy. It's pretty rare for me to describe a book that way. I think a lot of books are trying to say something. I think this one is too, but it does such a poor job of it that this is entirely crunchy. It's fun and easy to read. You're not going to get a lot out of it. After that, I read The Lies of the Ajungo by Moses Osei-Otomi, and I feel kind of the opposite about this as I did about The Sunshine Court. I absolutely loved this book. I gave it 5 stars, and I feel like it should be a required reading. It's just really incredible. It's a novella that packs a really strong punch, and in this story, we're following this little boy named Tutu who lives in a place called the City of Lies where there is no water, and he ends up embarking on this dangerous journey across the Forever Desert to look for water to save his mother and to save his city. Along the way, he starts to learn more about the world, he meets new people, and he starts to learn about why the City of Lies is called the City of Lies and why it is that there is no water in the City of Lies. It's basically a book exploring Tutu's development from a child to a young man. It crosses about a year of his life, so we're seeing him go from like 12 to 13. So it's a very short period, but we're seeing his transition from childhood to adulthood, and through that, we're looking at like power structures and the power of propaganda in particular, the ways that hierarchies operate to oppress whoever might threaten their power, the power of those at the very top. It also, I think, talks a little bit about like the necessity of violent resistance in some instances. And it's just a really interesting story. I think Tutu is a really fascinating character to follow because he comes from a like very interesting position in the world. He's on this moment of transition that is really significant in his culture, but for him ends up being significant in a very different way. And I really enjoyed it. I think Tutu's a wonderful character to follow. I like the way that his knowledge develops, the way his power develops throughout the story, the way that he cares for other people, the relationships that he builds. I think the whole thing is just really, really wonderfully written. The writing is really beautiful as well. I think it's just really quotable, and I feel like it just drags you through the story so well. It keeps you engaged. It's really easy to read. And for that reason, I feel like this book falls somewhere. It's not crunchy, but it does have some high action moments. I think it falls somewhere between smooth and chewy because I feel like the actual reading experience is just so pleasant and easy to get through, but there are some really high impact moments and some moments that are really like action packed as well. And it's really giving you a lot of important themes to kind of mull on after you've read the book. After that, I finished Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle, which I had been reading for a while, but this is one of the most anxiety-inducing horror books I've ever read. This one is following a screenwriter named Misha Byrne, who is basically given the ultimatum of be fired or kill off your gay characters before the next season finale. And then he starts being haunted by monsters from his horror writing past that are all based on like traumatic events that he went through as a child. This one I think is really intense because its horror does something I haven't seen very much, which is that the horror happens in front of other people, it happens to other people. There's never really a moment where people are like, oh, this isn't actually happening, it's all in your head, you're crazy. And I find that way more terrifying, personally, that Misha finds himself witnessing this horror impacting people around him and completely powerless to do anything about it. I really liked also the main trio of characters we have here. We have Misha and also his best friend Tara and his boyfriend Zeke. And I liked the dynamic between those 3 people. I felt like they were a really good team as they were working through the situation. And the situation itself literalizes something that's very present in our daily lives. I'm trying really hard not to like spoil anything, but it literalizes something that we engage with every single day through social media and through our like engagement of and consumption of media. It makes that the horror, and I really, really appreciate what it's doing with that. I think it's really clever. I think the twist reveals are really well done, and I appreciate the commentary this horror is giving us about like our engagement with media, our consumption of media, and also like the importance of stories that show a variety of perspectives, the importance of stories that show something beyond queer tragedy, which I think is really the core of this story, is that like desire for more nuanced stories and more kinds of stories, things that show a variety of emotional experiences. And I really appreciate what Chuck Tingle is doing in here. I only had one issue with it, which is that I feel like one of his characters was kind of underutilized in a way that particularly irks me specifically, where we have Zeke who kind of becomes the like supportive boyfriend man, and I don't feel like he gets to be much outside of that. But beyond that, this is really fantastic, and I cannot more highly recommend it if you like horror. Before I forget too, because I'm still getting in my head that I'm doing the scale thing, I would say that this falls more on the side of chewy, but I think it's somewhere between like chewy and crunchy, because it's really action-packed, there's a lot happening, there's some really, really anxiety-inducing horror scenes in here. I feel like it's a book that really keeps you at the edge of your seat, and it is like crunching on popcorn at the movies, but it gives you a lot to think about at the same time. So like maybe it's a really delicious flavored popcorn at the movies, which I feel is thematically relevant. After that, I read I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel. This is a sort of weird literary fiction story about a woman who is stalking another woman online because they're both sleeping with the same man, and it's about her obsession with both the man and the woman for very different reasons, and it explores the kind of spiral that she finds herself on, but it's also looking a lot at a number of different topics. It talks about race, it talks about class, it talks about gender, it talks about our relationship to art. It also talks a lot about like marginalized voices in art, which I thought was interesting. Particularly there's a conversation in here about whether marginalized voices who lean into like tragedy narratives are participating in their own harm and their own othering through doing so, even as they're trying to like build a following or gain power through engagement with the media and the algorithm. So it's a really interesting narrative. I think it is drawing in a lot of really important conversations, and I really enjoyed the writing style of this. It's told in a really interesting format of these like little short vignettes of little moments that jump around in time from when the main character has like met this man and kind of this major turning point in the relationship much further down the road, like several years later. So you're kind of jumping around in time. It's a little bit confusing. And ultimately, I gave this 3.5 stars because I think that it gets a little bogged down in its own points. It's trying to do a lot of things at once, and there's entire sections where the plot just disappears. And in fact, I think the plot kind of disappears from about page 60 to about like this last 20 pages or so. And it's just this more philosophical exploration of the characters and of their relationships, which I think is interesting, but I think drags a little bit in the middle, and it just gets a little bit bogged down under its own points. So overall, I think this is really strong as a debut, which I'm pretty sure it is, and I had a good time reading it. I think, though, it definitely would help if you went into this with, like, some background knowledge on, like, feminism and sociology. I feel like it's pulling a lot of ideas from those fields, but I think having some of that background knowledge is really helpful for understanding what this book is trying to get at. This is one I would say is much further towards chewy. I would say maybe like a little bit towards smooth because the writing is really interesting. It's kind of stream of consciousness. It's really easy to read in terms of the like sentence level structure, but I would say this is mostly a chewy book. This is a book that wants you to think. It wants to challenge you. It wants to push you into the shoes of a character who's very unpleasant, and in fact several characters who are very unpleasant in different ways, and force you to see through their eyes and think through these concepts like from their perspective. So I think this is one of the few books I would say is like almost entirely chewy. Next up, I read A Magical Girl Retires by Park Solyon, and I gave this one 3 stars. This one I would say is mostly smooth. This is a book where the writing is really easy to read. We're following a young woman who at the start of the story is about to commit suicide, right, like first few pages, and she gets approached in that moment by another young woman who claims that she believes that the main character, who I don't think ever gets named in the story, I cannot think of her name, so I don't think she ever does get named, but she's approached by this other young woman, Aroa, who tells her, hey, I think you're a magical girl. In fact, I think you might be the most powerful magical girl. You should come with me and help us save the world. And so she ends up having to fight climate change with a credit card, because her story kind of orients itself around like the concept of credit card debt. And it's really interesting. There's It's hard to talk about because it's a pretty short book, and I would say that, like, very little happens, but also a lot happens, if that makes sense. Like, very little happens in terms of, like, the number of events, but things shift pretty dramatically for our main character. But I said that this was a smooth book, and the reason I say that is there isn't really any friction in the book. Most of the story is our main character being dragged around by Aroa to witness various events and react to them. Even at the very end, I don't think she really gets to do very much, and this is what really dragged my rating down, is I don't think she gets very much agency. She just kind of gets dragged around, and even in the moment where she's, like, saving the world, she really does almost nothing. And I just found that that wasn't a very believable storyline or trajectory for her from where she starts at the beginning of the book. I also think that this book's discussion of climate change, which is its sort of central conflict, is very surface level, and I think that the villain that it sets up creates some dissonance in the conflict that's created, because it's very much about climate change, but it's more so about individual responsibility for addressing climate change as opposed to addressing the actual kind of major players in causing climate change. I also am not sure how I feel about the villain being who she is. If you don't want spoilers, stop listening for about 10 seconds, but we get a woman who's a domestic violence survivor who's like, fuck humanity. I'm gonna destroy the world through climate change. And I don't know that that gels well with the book's description of how and why magical girls exist, how they get their powers, and it also doesn't gel well, I think, with the theme of climate change. After that, I read The Orb of Kairado by Catherine Addison. This is a spin-off from the Goblin Emperor world, and it's following a historian named Jorvana, who is previously a historian, I should say, because he was accused falsely of stealing a really important artifact many years ago, and now, several years later, his best friend dies in the airship accident that kicks off the events of the Goblin Emperor, his friend being a crew member on that airship, and Jorvana finds that his friend has left him a puzzle that eventually leads him to figuring out who actually stole the artifact he was accused of stealing, and unraveling some bigger mysteries within the department that he used to work in. I really enjoyed this. I think this is really fun. It's just like a puzzle-solving, mystery-solving little jaunt through the world of the Goblin Emperor, and I just thought it was a ton of fun. I really like Jorvana as a character. I like his kind of dedication to doing what's right, even though he feels a lot of guilt over what he's done over the years, because he's also worked as a smuggler and as I don't know what the exact term for it would be, but he writes false provenances for smuggled artifacts, and so he feels a lot of guilt about that, but he also has this, like, very strong sense of right and wrong and, like, what he should do versus, like, what he feels he must do or what he feels he's required to do. So I found them just really interesting, and I had a lot of fun reading this one, so I believe I gave it 5 stars, and I would say that this is mostly a crunchy book, actually. I'm gonna put it sort of not quite in the middle towards chewy, because I don't think it's giving you any, like, major themes to think about, aside from it does talk a little bit about, like, artifacts and who should be responsible for caring for them. So I think that's interesting, but the actual writing itself is fairly difficult in terms of its learning curve if you haven't read The Goblin Emperor, because there's a lot of weird names. There's a very specific, like, naming system and a system of address for different characters based on their, like, role in society. And so I think if you're not familiar with this world already, this one would be a little bit of a difficult spot to dive in. So I'm gonna say it's crunchy, but, like, slightly on the chewy side of crunchy. Our penultimate book is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, and I ended up enjoying this one a lot more than I thought. I gave it 4 stars, and I found that I really enjoyed following Alex. We also get a POV from her mentor Darlington. The setup for the book is that Alex is a former drug addict who is able to see ghosts. She's been able to see ghosts her whole life, but people don't really believe her until she's approached right after a big traumatic event by the leader of Lethe House at Yale, which is a secret society, hard to say apparently, that exists primarily to police the other secret societies and ensure that they're not doing harm to the surrounding community. And so she gets a chance to go to Yale, she's assigned to her mentor Darlington, and right at the start of the book we find out that Darlington is missing and Alex is having to investigate a murder without him. So we get this kind of, like, bouncing timeline where we're moving back and forth between Alex in the present investigating this murder that hits her very emotionally. Like, she gets involved for very emotional reasons, which I really appreciated. And the past timeline where we're looking back from the beginning of her relationship with Darlington up until the event that sees him go missing. And we're learning more about their relationship, about magic at Yale, and about kind of Darlington's role in Lethe House and the things that he's been doing kind of behind the scenes to look into some other unexplained occurrences around Lethe House. So there's kind of multiple mysteries happening, and I feel like that all gets tied together really well. This book also has a fairly strong undercurrent of a theme that's about violence against women, and especially violence against marginalized women, and I found that that was really interesting. I liked the way that it pulled all of that together at the very end. It does have an interesting twist comment on feminism that allows for the continued marginalization of particularly women of color and queer women to further the agendas of, like, straight white women. I found that very interesting. I really like that part of the culmination of this book, the way everything gets tied together in a bow in the end. My one problem with this is that rape and sexual assault get used way too much in the book. It pops up, I think, 4 total times as a plot beat, and I feel like only one of those gets dealt with in a meaningful way. I also found that there were some moments where the pacing, especially around those, like, there would be flashback moments for some of the rape and sexual assault moments in the story, but there would be flashback moments kind of around that where it felt like there was this, like, jarring shift between kind of moving along with the mystery and then suddenly getting yanked backwards to look at something that happened like 20 years ago. So I feel like some of the pacing was a little bit jarring, and I found that its use of sexual assault as a plot beat was just not handled very well. This one too, I would say, it's on the chewy side of crunchy. I think this is a little closer to chewy than the Orb of Kairado is, because it has a lot more themes that it's trying to discuss. And it's asking you to pay a little bit more attention to, like, who's in power and who is gaining power through what means. But I still say this is a fairly crunchy book. It's very, like, action-packed. There's a lot happening. There's lots of mystery. There's lots of intrigue and horror, and there's just a lot going on. It's very addictive and easy to pick up, but it's not solely crunchy. Finally, we gotta talk fast about this last book, which I also gave 4 stars, The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. This one I really enjoyed. I think this is dealing with a lot of really big ideas. This is a eldritch horror fantasy thing where cities come to life. They essentially reach a breaking point and they become entities of their own. And through that process, they gain avatars who are people who, like, literally represent the city. This was a really interesting idea, and it's fun to follow the avatars as they are dealing with what's referred to several times as the birthing process of the city. And in particular, every time this happens to a city, there's this eldritch enemy that shows up and tries to stop it, tries to prevent the city from being born. So these avatars are having to go through a situation that is much different from usual, as there's, like, a large group of avatars. There's 5, 1 for each of the boroughs and 1 for the city as a whole. Did I say 5? I meant 6. There's 6. 5 for each of the boroughs and 1 for the city as a whole. And they are having to band together to try and figure out, like, why is the enemy acting differently than normal? And also, how do we stop them? So it was just a really fun ride, but I think the pacing in this one is not great for the first half. The first half feels very repetitive, and I think the book as a whole feels a little bit frictionless. There's some obstacles that show up that get resolved way too easily, and they're just done way too quickly. Or there's stuff that gets brought up that then disappears off the face of the earth for the rest of the book. There's some characters that get brought in who just disappear. So I feel like I had some issues with wanting more conflict out of it, wanting more pushback from the characters on what was happening to them. But overall, I enjoyed the way that the book was, like, representing its characters. I think there's some really beautiful relationships here. I think there's a lot of nuance in each of the characters. I liked how distinctive and interesting they were. I really just enjoyed all of them. I couldn't even pick a favorite. I kept trying to be like, oh, this one's my favorite or that one's my favorite, but I love all of them. I think they're all really well written and really, like, believable as people. I just feel like some of the other elements were not as developed as they could have been. I also really liked the way that this incorporated ideas around, like, gentrification and misogyny and fascism into its eldritch horror and use that as a way to talk about those things. I felt like that was just really clever and really interesting way to explore those ideas and the ways that they impact the world. So I really appreciated everything that N.K. Jemisin was doing in this book, and I think the writing is wonderful. It's such a, like, pleasant and easy reading experience, so I definitely will be reading from her again. I just had some kind of minor issues with the, like, pacing and some of the, like, plot development. I would say that this book overall is on the chewy side of smooth. It's giving you a lot of things to think about, but the writing is just so damn pleasant to read and so fun to read. So I feel like the actual reading experience just like drags you through really easily, but it's just throwing lots of big ideas at you along the way. So these are all the books that I read in March, plus a couple of ebooks. I really enjoyed this reading month and I'm really looking forward to April. Let me know down in the comments below what you read in March, especially I would love to know what your favorite thing you read in March was. I think that's always my comment in my wrap-ups or my question in my wrap-ups, but I just love to hear what people have been reading and loving. So let me know down in the comments what your favorite thing was you read in March, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, I hope you consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.